Hi, welcome to an OSLO tutorial. Today I'm going to talk about a workhorse feature in the program, the surface data spreadsheet. So this is the spreadsheet where you actually enter a lot of lens data, and it also gives you access to a large number of the features in the program. So it's very important to understand how this spreadsheet works. It's also called the lens spreadsheet editor. That's typically what I call it due to its command name that I'll show here in just a moment. Before I actually get to that, I'm just going to mention all of the example lenses that I have open in this specific tutorial are all in the demo edu part of the public directory, and it doesn't really matter what lenses you have open or what systems you have chosen for learning about this specific feature. I just find it's more exciting to have some lens data in there. So I'm starting off with this Ebert grading monochromator, which is a little bit of an unusual system compared to an imaging system. It actually is meant to separate color. It's a spectrometer. So the lens data spreadsheet, the surface data spreadsheet, there's three ways to actually access it. One is to click on this open surface data spreadsheet button. You can see the little tooltip for it there. A second one is to go here to the surface data spreadsheet under lens. And what I tend to do is I tend to use the command, which is just LSE. That's the three-letter shortened command. There's actually a full name for the command as well. When you click on this, it will open up the surface data spreadsheet, and I'll talk a little bit later about auto draw, but that can be turned on and off. In this case, I have it on. You'll notice there's a number of different fields here, and I'm now going to sequentially go through these different fields in the surface data editor. So here we have in the upper left the green check mark and red X, which have the normal functionality to either accept changes or to cancel changes. If you're not familiar with these, there is an available video on our website that actually has that information about them. And one thing I like to point out is this help question mark. If I hit it here, I will actually open up the OSLO help for this specific spreadsheet, which is really, really handy, really, really good to have available right there. You can also access this by typing in help and then finding it, searching under the index or the contents, or going to the help button in the top menu. I just like to know that I can click on it right there and I go right to a spreadsheet, a part of the online help that gives me a something specifically about this spreadsheet that I'm on. You'll notice that the command line is effectively embedded here in the surface data editor. So this is really handy. It actually has, you have the ability to look at the history here still with this right arrow, down arrow button. And you can type in commands here. Now, the majority of commands will still be enabled. And you can even edit things such as if I want to change this value of this second surface thickness, I can do TH2. Let's say I want to change it to 120. I can do that. I've made that change, and it even remembers it in the command history. I found that not all commands are always saved. And the issue is that some commands, if they're called and run through the handler in the surface data editor itself, then they won't necessarily get saved inside of the command history. And I've never really gone through and figured out all of the cases where this applies or doesn't apply. I'm just telling you now that if you do some things in the surface data spreadsheet, all of what you've done is not everything that you've done is necessarily going to end up being shown in the history. As you can see, I just changed that number to 100 and it didn't show up anywhere. I'm going to actually red X out of this so that I get back to my original copy of the Ebert grading monochromator. Okay, so that is the command line. I'll show a handy little trick with this later. Up here to the upper right, you've got a number of buttons. You see a bunch of them are grayed out right now, but this insert row above the selector row, well, that's still here. And even on the tooltip, you can see there's some quick strokes to do a Control I to do the same sort of thing. If I click on that button, I'm start adding rows. If I click on multiple ones, look, these open up. Well, these buttons are cut and paste types of operations. So I can cut it and then paste it somewhere else. Right now I haven't cut or copied anything. This is the copy button. So since I haven't cut or copied anything, I can't paste it yet. But once I cut it, I can then say paste it in. So pretty similar kinds of stuff to what you may be used to with other programs. There just aren't always quick stroke keys for that, for these types of commands. I'm actually going to go to a different lens right now. I don't want to save those specific changes. This is just a pencil lens, so in this case I've got two doublets, and let's say for some reason I want to actually flip one of the doublets around. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to select these three. Notice these surfaces are now dotted. In the auto draw window, now I can reverse this, and when I reverse this, you see it flipped it around and took care of all the mathematics of changing signs and some things like that that you would do. So that's what that reverse button's used for. You say, I may never use that. You might find there's cases where you will, but one trick in optical design is to take an element and to actually flip it around. As long as the first order properties stay pretty close, you might actually find some other optimization options there, some other you might find that you can change the properties of the lens and find newer or better minima out of that. So it's a nice little thing to have. Many of the spreadsheets have this. The one button that I haven't shown is this button here, which says show selected database rows only. So if I go to the lens database, and let's just say I go to the public and I select a set of rows, that is now enabled, and if I click on that, it limits me now to just the ones that I've selected. So that one's a little bit of a specialty button. So at this point I actually want to go back to my grading example and back to the spreadsheet editor. So that's what these upper right buttons do. The next set of buttons, or the next set of features, are these buttons here in the middle, the mid-level buttons. And these buttons do a number of different things. A lot of them open up other spreadsheets that I'm not going to get into in detail here. This one is for the general operating conditions. This one is setup numbers. So this sets some first order parameters, and those actually will change some numbers down here. The wavelength is the different wavelengths of light along with some weights that you have defined for use in the lens. Same thing for field points. It does that for where you are in the field of view, what points you have available for that. Here's variables. So this is when I optimize. Right now I don't have any defined, so you can click there to get to that. There's other ways to get to a lot of these. For example, variable spreadsheet editor is VSE, and variables are also up here. And there's even a way to get to it. If I change a variable and go to special variable, it will open that. So there's a bunch of ways to get to the variables. I'm not going to talk too much more about that. This is just one place where we have an option for you to access that data. This draw on off button is a toggle button. What it toggles is it toggles the ability to have the auto draw window open or not. So if I turn it off, I don't have that window open. If I turn it on, I have it open. I showed earlier that when I flip a lens, the auto draw window is convenient because I can see which surfaces I've selected. But you may do some things sometimes where you really don't want the auto draw window open. It can actually be, there's times when I really don't need it, I'm not really using it, and so we allow you to turn it off. This group button allows you to see specific surface data for something that's actually grouped. So this is grouped, so I can't actually change these numbers because it specifically doesn't allow me to do it. I would do this with, say, a catalog lens, where if I change these numbers, I no longer have the catalog lens that I originally selected. So this allows you to toggle back and forth to see grouped data or not. It's kind of nice to have. And then this just gives notes for the lens. So this is just notes here. Since this is in a demonstration, the person who put this demo put this system specifically in the program, did it to try to teach people something. So here there's some notes on what they were actually trying to do or how to use it, and the same thing applies here for this grading this spectrograph example. So that's where you can put in some surface notes. The next set of information is this set of fields down here. A number of these, the majority of them, are actually editable. So here's the name for the lens. So this is going to be what appears on things like this auto draw. It's going to be the thing that appears here in the lens drawing. The zoom is for multi-configuration. The focal length, now this is an unusual lens, so it doesn't have focal length in the traditional sense, so it's grayed out. But that's where your focal length goes. That one's actually not normally editable, and that's because it's a computed value based on the data that you have down below. These two fields are effectively what sets the speed, i.e. the f number, numerical aperture, however you're choosing to define it in your system, defining the light that's going to propagate through, and also the field of view, which in this case, this system's set up with an object type, but it could also be set up with an angle for the half field of view. And then this is just what wavelength you're actually evaluating at right now. And if I switch this, it didn't actually change it in that case. But that actually, this button for that wavelength will actually switch and make a lot of commands will run off of that now. But the primary wavelength here is the first wavelength in that spreadsheet. So you can look up more data on that specific thing. I actually hardly ever pay much attention to that specific button. It happens to be here, so you at least know what the primary wavelength you've chosen for your system is. So the next part of this is the very large set of fields down below. So these large fields have a number of different factors and features. The main thing is that there's a number of buttons here, and then there are a number of editable fields that have numbers and data in them. Here, of course, it's not numbers. This just gives you what glass you may have. In this case, it's reflect hatch, so it draws a reflector and puts a hatching on it. You can also choose a just reflect and then the hatching doesn't appear, for example. I'll get to this button in a minute. So the way these work is if I want to change some data in the program, I can simply type in new data. And I'll make sure I don't type in the wrong button, minus 245, and there we go, I change it. Let's say I want to make this 90% of what it was. I can actually take and multiply by 0.9. This is hugely powerful in OSLO, and every other design code I've ever used, it has annoyed me that I have not been able to as easily do this type of change to a program, to data, to just simply do a mathematical operation there. Now you can also do mathematics with this spreadsheet open, but if you have it open here, so if I say 2 times, let's do 12 times 10 here. If I do that, it'll actually enter that in here. So if I'm doing math, like a calculator, or I'm doing some calculation for something, you'll want to make sure you're not in an editable button there. That's one pitfall to that feature, but in general I've found it's really, really great to have. So that's effectively it for that. Now if I want to change to some other sort of glass or some other sort of material, I'm going to go to this Petzval lens to do that. So here I have a number of things. This is F2. Let's say I want to change this to SF2. I can just type in SF2. If it's a known glass, then there you go. It just accepted it. Now if I type in some nonsensical name, like hi mom, it doesn't know what hi is. It doesn't know what that means. Now it kept it in the field, but it's rendered meaningless at this point in terms of its what it's actually doing. I'm not quite sure what it does in that. OSLO actually does in that case. It might keep glass data from what I had and just has that name on it and it's chosen some other default model for a glass or something like that. These buttons get very detailed, and the way some of these things work tends to get detailed, but you get the idea. So glass names here and then other data. The way these work is this is the radius of curvature, the thickness. The aperture radius is, of course, half of the total width of the lens that you have defined. The illuminated area may be a little bit different depending on how you have the light defined going into the system or not. So a few more nuances with this. So a lot of these buttons here, the radii ones, the thickness ones, the aperture radius ones, and the glass ones, can do things for the column that's to the left. So for radius, for example, we can put solves on, we can do pickups. A pickup is where you set something relative to a previous value. So here, let's say I want 1 and 2 to actually have the exact same curvature, but with the opposite sign. I could do a minus curvature pickup there, and if I go to 1, and then there's a pickup constant and a multiplier, you can see now it's changed that, and it's the same magnitude, it just has the opposite sign. So you can do a lot of things with these buttons. There's a special one also that you can actually set the numerical aperture or the f number of a lens by solving for an axial ray angle, and you can do some solves and things like that with these buttons. So really powerful, good stuff. Thickness is very similar sort of options as radius. The aperture radius has a number of different options, pickups, solves. You can actually choose to change the aperture radius here. So that's now it's 12, or sorry, now it's its radius is 12, but it's surface number 5, which is actually this buried surface, probably not always the most logical choice. I can change here to the back surface, and that would now be treated as the aperture stop in the system. This would okay or not means whether you choose to block light that's outside of the defined aperture radius or not. That's called checking a surface. OSLO does not always block light unless you tell it to. Now that sounds like a disadvantage, but it's actually very advantageous often in your designing phase to not worry so much about the size of the lenses and instead just keep working along, and then at the end you sort of fix the lens and make sure that the sizes are all okay and you're getting the light through you want to get through. So you're telling it whether to block light or not. And then there's some other special aperture data that you have in here, as well as some options like pickups and solving that we had for the radius and thickness. The glass has a number of options. Some of them I'm not really going to talk about. The main thing is you can get at the catalogs, the different catalogs that we have here, whether it's shot glass or if you're CDGM, Hoya, O'Hara, whatever you want to be using at the time. Here's how you do reflected surfaces. You can also do pickups. So if I want a glass to be the same as some previous glass, but I may want to change that glass, but I want them to remain the same, I can do a pickup on one, and so on. So there's a lot of things that you can do with that. There are actually 2 of these rows that are just buttons. They don't have data off to the left. So I'm going to start with the special. The special has a whole bunch of different things in it. This is where things like A-spheres are, where you can change surface coordinates, where you can pick special elements like perfect lenses and a whole bunch of diffractive surfaces and other sorts of special types of surface data. Many of them, like if I want to make this an A-sphere, I pull this up, I want to make it a conic, it pulled up another spreadsheet that actually controls what type of data that is. This sort of layered spreadsheet structuring takes a little bit of getting used to, but it actually is pretty powerful and works pretty well. Just be aware that if it's something involving a special surface, it's over here under special. Some of the organization of the program can also take a little bit of getting used to, just because we do have some of this data. For example, surface note. If I want to put a note on a surface, it's actually over here. And I say, hi, Mom, again. And you see, now it doesn't really show up anywhere, but now I have this little N here, which tells me that there is some special data associated with that. Where that actually shows up is if I go to show surface data. Then there is somewhere in here where it should say, hi, Mom. But of course, now since I'm doing this live, I can't necessarily find, oh, that's refractive index. It's way up here. It says, hi, Mom. So there's your note under it. So that's one thing that'd be nice to have, is the ability to put notes specifically on the spreadsheet, but it's not in the program, so you have to kind of keep track of it a little bit yourself. And I've gotten pretty used to doing that. It would be nice to have it. So anyway, that's one little difference from some other programs too. So that's generally the special button here. So very, very powerful, and this is just how we have it organized. The other thing that we have here are these buttons to the left. Now these, if I click on them, they really don't do anything. All this does, in other words, it doesn't pull up anything special. What this does is this allows you to select a row. So if I have a row selected, I can hold and drag. So I'm just left clicking, holding and dragging down. I select multiple rows, and there's other ways to do this. Like here, I hit row 1 with the left mouse click, and then I held down and I clicked on 5 when I had shift held down, and boom, it selects all these surfaces. So you can do different things like that. Again, lots of little keystrokes and other things are available in this as well. So let's see. That's pretty much it for all of the different data fields. I wanted to mention a couple things about clicking on surfaces. So or clicking in general, if I right click, you'll see I can do inserting before or after, or inserting catalog lenses, other kinds of things like that. And if I click up here, it just puts it before the surface. So if I click up here and I say insert before, it throws it not before the object, but before the first surface in the system. So it's got a new one, surface 1 in this case. If I want to put something in here, I can right click anywhere in this field, and you can see I get this little set of data getting pulled up. If I have things selected like this, I can actually go to reverse this. Well, this is the same as this button up here. This is just another way to do it. So right clicking gives you some specific options, including scaling the selection or even scaling the entire lens. So there's a lot of things that you can do with that. One other very strange thing, if you ever get into this mode, initially it seems strange, but it has one sort of use. Let's say I have this surface, and let's say I have this thickness. If I actually just left click on it, nothing happens. If I hold control down and left click, now I go onto this button, or now I've got this highlighted. Well, that's kind of strange. Well, what I can do is I can actually, let's see, that's a 5 that's after. So I'm going to round that up. So I just hit my up arrow button on my keyboard, and it actually rounded it up. So it's a really quick way to round buttons off. So there's some things in this program that are set up that way that are a little bit unique and have some utility. So I'm not going to go through an exhaustive list of those. There was an old funny story that one of our customer support people a few years ago was contacted by someone who asked if they could be taught how to use OSLO without a mouse. And so they went through this process of trying to find all of these really strange, if your mouse is broken, how do you still run the program types of options available. And anyway, kind of a funny little story about that. So there are some things like that. So don't be afraid if you get into that type of mode. The easy way to get out is just hit escape and you're back out of it. The last thing I'm going to mention is a little bit about moving and resizing. You can go ahead and resize this. If you resize left, right, it doesn't actually scale. This is set field width here. So it doesn't really do a lot there, but it does help you vertically to move up and down depending on how many rows and things you want to see. So there's a lot to the surface data spreadsheet. It's, as I said, it's extremely important to the program, and that's why this video is a little bit longer than some of the other ones we've been doing. So I hope you found this useful, and hope that you enjoy using OSLO as much as I do. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.